Members of the Cannabis Research Center have been studying water use on cannabis farms since 2017. Studies have primarily relied on water use reports from farmers enrolled in the state's cannabis cultivation program, but also anonymous farmer surveys. While data on water use remains limited for unpermitted farms, our research on permitted farms is improving understanding of cannabis water use practices and their associated environmental impacts.
Cannabis water use practices vary. I mean, we've learned a lot in the past few years through analysis of records from permitted farms submitted through the State Water Board, as well as through surveys with growers. And it's important to separate sort of the sourcing of water, so where cannabis farms are getting their water, and then how they use their water once they get it on farm. And so what we found is cannabis farmers can rely on a really broad diversity of water sources. This could include streams and rivers, so what we consider surface waters, but also springs, as well as groundwater, and in some cases, rainwater or even imported water from other sources. The irrigation season is in the summer when water supplies are naturally limited. And so one reason why cannabis farmers store water and invest in storage on their site is so they can have a reliable water supply throughout the growing season, and they'll fill those storage tanks with water either collected in the winter time when water is more plentiful, or they can actually fill it on demand, if they're diverting from groundwater, for example, and it just is a convenient way for them to deliver water into the irrigation systems. What's interesting about storage are some of the regulatory implications. And so under the current state law set by the Water Board policy around permitted cannabis farms, in order to get a permit, you're actually not allowed to divert water, surface water, throughout the summer season. And the dates are basically from March until November. You're not actually allowed to divert any water from a river or stream. And so this means if you want to get a permit, if a farmer wants to become permitted, they need to either build sufficient storage so they can divert that water in the wet season and have all that water stored to carry them through the dry season, or they could move to groundwater wells, which are not subject to the same regulatory requirements. One of the things that we've learned when thinking about the potential environmental impacts of cannabis water use is that we can't necessarily assume the amount of water and the timing of water that's being applied to plants is coming out of the environment at the same time. And this points to the role of storage. If a farmer has sufficient storage or has any sort of storage capacity, they're often going to be diverting that water in the wintertime and using it in the summer. And so the timing of those impacts is in the wintertime. Conversely, if they're actually pumping water on demand in the dry season and the irrigation season, then that's when those impacts are occurring. And that's what we're really concerned about, because that's when flows, and particularly in rivers and streams, are naturally low, and that trickle of water that is there is really important for sustaining salmon and other sensitive species that we care about. We know that farming generally often uses fertilizers, pesticides, other agrochemicals to improve production or protect their plants. And we actually have a lot of evidence that from illicit grows or trespass grows, that sometimes there's the use of chemicals and rodenticides in particular that can have really significant impacts on fish and wildlife. Growers that enter the permitted market and are subject to very stringent management requirements that prevents the sort of input of fertilizers or chemicals into the environment. But we know that the vast majority of growers in the state are still unpermitted, and so there's still concern and a lot of uncertainty around how potentially harmful chemicals are being used. So this points to another really important area of research is understanding sort of the basic agricultural practices of these unpermitted farms and the extent to which they may pose a threat to water quality.